Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership podcast. I am delighted to have a particularly famous, respected, and edgy guest, Anthony Scaramucci. Anthony's had a whole load of experiences in life, but I've particularly got to know him as the co-host with Catty of The Rest is Politics USA, and he's worked closely with Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart in the Rest is Politics. They have 9 million downloads a month, which is phenomenal. They were in the O2 recently. Written a variety of books. He was introduced to me by my friend Brian J. Esposito because he has a fascinating angle on crypto and blockchain in an area that he's working in. He also worked in 2016 with Donald J. Trump's presidential team. And that's where we saw the fascinating time when he had a really interesting moment with what's going on with politics, describing his 10 days there as being, I think, Anthony, you called it the sort of White House fire and the buzzsaw of politics, along with getting your face smashed in. What I've enjoyed in our conversations, Anthony and I,
it was 11 days, Jonathan. I won't hold it against you, but don't jip me out of that last day. I mean, that was a big day for me. I got fired in that day.
Tell us about it then, Anthony. It's really good having you on, by the way. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I listen, first of all, it's a pleasure to be on with you. And I love what you're doing because I think it's providing space for people to be open and vulnerable, but also, I've made a series of mistakes in my life that if I share them with you and your viewers and listeners, maybe it'll give them pause on some of the things that they're doing. Maybe it'll give them a chance to course correct on something so they don't end up in the car crash that I ended up in. But having said that, like most things in life, as long as it's not a health reason, if you have a situation like what happened to me, you can survive it. You can dust yourself off and go on to thrive and do exceptional things. And weirdly, Jonathan, I guess I'll leave you with this thought before you ask me another question. Weirdly, it gave me a platform. It gave me an opportunity to discuss what I saw. It gave me an opportunity to discuss and provide perhaps some at least reflection and insights on what's going on even today, and also provide some caution for people in terms of how this is going down for America, but also for the world.
Yeah, and we'll come on to that because I have really enjoyed the conversations, the level of openness, honesty, and vulnerability you've shared. You and I have both come across leaders, and we've probably been those people in our early years where we were terribly self-confident, thought everything was going our way. This golden chain of success. I remember when I was an instructor at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, I thought I was God's gift. I'd had outstanding reports all the way through. And then suddenly I was average, and I had my sort of smash in the face, thinking my career was over. And that's when I learned about my father as an inspiring leader, and his sword is behind us. And his hat on the wall, because he was killed when I was 3. And I've learned a lot from a man beyond the grave. But in your particular case, it was a very public 11-day White House tenure. But you were dealing with such an eclectic mix of weird leaders. And if ever I'm trying to give people an example of the opposite to what I mean by inspiring leadership, the name of this podcast, I used Donald J. Trump and his acolytes, some of whom were good, but some of whom really sold their values and their integrity down the line to be with him. At the time when you call things out and it all crashed, what were you finding working with, I think, Chief of Staff, is it Rice Priebus?
Yeah, Rice Priebus, yep.
A paranoid schizophrenic. And then you got Steve Bannon and people like that. Just what was the world like that you were being surrounded by at the time when it all came crashing down?
Well, I mean, listen, people forget. I mean, I didn't get fired for that conversation. That was, no. Trump loved that conversation. I did call Priebus a paranoid schizophrenic. I felt he was acting that way. I think that Bannon was malevolent. And the great irony is that was an amateurish thing for me to do because I was on the phone with an Italian-American journalist who I had known from my hometown. So my family, my dad actually knew his father for 50 years at that moment. And I had known him since he was a kid. And so I thought I was talking to him in an off the record, jocular way. He recorded me and then he ran to CNN with it. And so, that we could fight about it, but the truth of the matter is I didn't specifically say to him right down the barrel, this is off the record. Now, I thought that was implied in the conversation, but that's the tough, bitter, razor sharp rules of Washington. And just to provide distinction between New York, DC, Maryland law versus what could go on in the UK, those are one party states. So what does that mean? I could record a phone call between you and I, Jonathan, without your permission because one of the people on the call is giving permission for the recording. There are certain states in the United States where you have to have permission to do that. I didn't expect him to do that to me given a 3-decade relationship with him, but he did that. And people blamed that for my firing, but it was really other things. I mean, I was fighting with the president over certain things. The president wanted me to say and do things that, frankly, I was not willing to say or do. He has found people that are willing to do that for him. Caroline Levitt, as an example, she's a very artful liar. She's got good looks and charisma, and she can sit up there and say lies for the president, probably 15 to 25 lies a day. And she does it without shame, which is exactly the type of person he's looking for. Believe it or not, Sean Spicer, who I used to call Liar Spice, because every Spice Girl has a nickname, was not a great liar. He grew up Roman Catholic. He was having a hard time telling people that crowd sizes were bigger than they actually were, and all the stupid stuff that Trump wanted him to do. So I would imagine it was a relief for him to be fired or to be let go when I was coming in. So actually, I think in fairness to him, I actually think he resigned immediately once I got hired. But listen, him and I were fighting, President Trump and I, and he said to me, and I knew my goose was cooked when he said to me, well, I thought you were on my team. I didn't realize you were part of the deep state. And I'm like, I'm part of the deep state. I think I came to Washington one time on a field trip. I said, I'm a working class kid from Long Island. I'm not part of the deep state, but what I am is patriotic, and what I am is someone that wants to abide by the Constitution and the institutions that are in place. A good president for me, and these are my editorial opinions, but a good president understands the sacred nature of the system. The system has been refined, started perhaps with King John and the Magna Carta, worked its way through the French Revolution, the parliamentary system that was developed in the UK. And it was crafted by a group of very smart, enlightened, mostly men, some women, but mostly men. And it was a system designed to present itself in a way that would prevent autocracy. It was a very decentralized system. And the system is held and it's provided space for meritocratic success in the United States, not based on a bloodline, not based on aristocracy or property rights. Somebody like me could rise in this country coming from a family, again, we were, by my description, we were in the middle class. I would never dishonor my dad by telling you I grew up poor. I did not grow up poor, but we had a tight budget and my parents were not going to have a lot of money when they retired. That was for sure, which inspired me to be a hustler and to work hard to create the success that I've had. But this happened in the United States. Could it happen in other places? Sure. Your country is improving. There is a British dream akin to the American dream. I've seen a lot of people rise in your country. The goal hanger guys, example, Tony Pastor, Gary Lineker, they came from relatively humble places. They've gone on to great monetary success in your country. But I think that the point is a good president, it's an institution. It's not them as the boss and you as their servant. It's the opposite. You're serving the public. Public's not serving you. The president sees it not as public service. He sees it as public self-service. I think there's a very big distinction between those two things. But he's got a lot of followers because the people that were there before him, his predecessors, I think, have had a tin ear towards a very large group of Americans that feel left out of the system. And I would say, Jonathan, your politicians fell victim to the same thing, which is why you led to the rise of the Brexit and why you still have a very group of discontented people in the country that are listening to populism and are listening to the anger-based notions of populism. And until we get transformative leaders to come in and sort of break that up and try to reunite the country, we're in for it.
Yeah, and I think it is fascinating that we'll perhaps cover a bit in a minute about your view on American, and I think you described it, how it's been split down the middle. But when I look at the guests, I've had a few politicians, and I'm going to be speaking to Sir Vince Cable, who led the Liberal Democrats shortly later this week. We're finding now a lot of the CEOs, particularly in America, are taking a knee to politicians like Trump. And, 1 minute they're on the opposite party, and then they're sucking up to the president to try and get in with him, particularly the oligarchs, because they fear a bit like Putin. I think there's quite a similarity with Putin and his oligarchs. What do you see with leaders copying the highly questionable, narcissistic, dishonest behaviors of some politicians, and particularly authoritarians, which you've studied closely?
Well, I mean, listen, the ends justify the means for a lot of people, sir. So President Trump is a success. I was with a group of people, and they were saying, well, that person's not going to succeed. And I said, well, why is that? And the woman responded, well, character is destiny. I said, character is destiny? I said, Donald Trump has 34 felony counts, convictions. He's been accused of sexual molestation. He's clearly on the Epstein file list, which is why they're having all this obfuscation. If he wasn't on the list, why would we have to shut the Congress down to make sure that the list doesn't get divulged? So he's obviously a harmful, malevolent, immoral guy. He's not the guy that I would look to you and say, even his super supporters don't see him as a man of good character. So, but he's the president of the United States. He's at the top of the food chain. So a lot of people would look at that and say, there's rules, and then there's rule breakers. It looks like the rule breakers are going to do better than the rule listeners, the ones that abide by the rules. So to me, that's going on around the world. People study that, say, okay, smash mouth talking, reality television show like production, shock jock DJ like behavior to get attention to yourself. And remember, this is coinciding with a very poor leadership structure in the Democratic Party, no real meaningful adversarial opponents that can take him on, and the populist movement of dissatisfaction by a very large group of people. And Jonathan, these are people I grew up with. I relate to these people. My dad was an aspirational blue collar worker, aspirational working class person, thought he would pay his dues, pay his bills, and one of his kids would go on to great success in the United States. The people like my dad, born in 1935, benefited from the post-World War II economy. But what if you had the same skill set as my dad, born in 1965 or 1975? Well, guess what happened to you in this country? That aspirational working class became economically desperational. And the politicians didn't care, and the people got angry. And so here comes a political leader that's like a wrecking ball, sort of an orange wrecking ball that's going to smash into these institutions that these people feel have not helped them. They support him. And, at the time, this is, again, I know this is a podcast about honest self-observations and honest observations about the world and what we can learn from our past mistakes. At the time, I was taken by Trump because of my upbringing. When I was in those neighborhoods, sir, I did 75 campaign stops with then Mr. Trump prior to his presidency. And I was meeting people that I was identifying with that I had empathy for. These were people like my father who really wanted to work. My dad was a hard worker. But you know what? If there were no jobs available, what was he going to do? And so the good news for him is there was a job available, met his skill set, got a reasonably high paid hourly wage, and fed his family. But these other people, factories had moved out. One guy, we were in New Mexico once, Jonathan, and one guy said to me, hey, Anthony, you think you're in New Mexico? He goes, well, New Mexico, that would be Mexico, because that's where the factory moved to. And I remember thinking, wow, that seriously bothered me. And I said, okay, the president's 69 years old, or Mr. Trump at that time, 69 years old. And I thought he was going to fix it. I thought he was going to be a transformative leader. And sometimes this is another thing that we do through cognitive dissonance. We talk ourselves into things.
Yeah.
I've had people that meet me on the street. Well, Trump was a bad guy in New York. Why'd you go work for him? You knew he was a bad guy. But we do things to ourselves. We trick ourselves. We talk ourselves into or out of things. And that's a mistake that I have to own for the rest of my life. But I want to explain to people there is a problem that Mr. Trump, now President Trump, identified in this country. There is a problem. So, if you don't want to fix that problem and you want to code over it, he's going to continue to have electoral victories.
And I think this is a nice way of you answering the accusations of sort of opportunism, that 1 minute you were working for him and the next minute you're his biggest critic. I think you went in with aspirationally hoping that things would get turned around, but when you actually found what the misleader was doing, then you've been calling it out ever since, and it's made you quite vulnerable from the sort of the attack from a lot of quite unhinged people. Have you ever had any personal threats that
Yeah,
you
of
worry
course.
about?
No, I've had many different types of death threats. I had one that I thought was concerning enough to bring up to the FBI. Frankly, obviously they addressed it for me. What am I going to do? I get threats a lot. I'm not. I'm a human being. I think it concerns my family more than me. I would rather talk about it, but I want to be as clear as possible on the podcast. I made a mistake supporting him. When he fired me, I didn't immediately go against him. My attitude was I didn't want to be a big baby. I just got fired and let me now be a bitter post employee. I tried to support him after I was fired. I felt that I was a loyal person, loyal to the Republican Party, and I thought it was responsible for me to be a big boy after I was fired, not to be some bitter baby. But 2 years, sir. I was trying to be loyal to him for 2 years. In the middle of August in 2019, 6 years ago, he was putting up on Twitter that he wanted these African American women and these Hispanic women known as the Squad. They're 4 members of the U.S. Congress. He wanted them to go back to the countries they originally came from. Now, the irony is 3 of them were born in the United States. 1 was naturalized from Africa. And that's American racism. That's American nativism. They said that to my Italian American grandmother in the 1920s, go back to the country you originally came from. I was on the Bill Maher show, literally defending the guy. One of the women on the show asked me, well, how do you feel about this? I said, well, I don't like that. He's the president. I wish he wouldn't talk like that, because the first name of the country is United, and the president is the only, it's important for your listeners to know this, the presidency is the only thing every eligible American citizen votes on. Remember, we're in a representative styled republic, if you will. There's one person the entire nation above the age of 18 votes on. That's the American presidency. And the first name of the country is United. We need somebody in that seat that's unifying. The show ended. Bill Maher turned to me and said, oh, he's going to go after you tomorrow. I said, well, why would he do that? I was defending him. He said, nah, you were 7 for 8 for Donald Trump tonight. You got to go 13 for 10 for Donald Trump, which, of course, we know is mathematically impossible. The very next day, he was attacking me. I'm a New Yorker, so I responded. I think I called him the fattest president since William Howard Taft, just to shove it up his you-know-what a little bit. And then he fired back at me. I fired back at him. And then, of course, he does what he does. He starts attacking my wife.
Wow.
And then the fight really started, and I hit him so hard that a couple of people reached out to me and said, okay, you probably should cool out because he's really inflamed now. But I'm a New Yorker. I'm not Ted Cruz. I'm not going to back down from the guy. Last time I checked in the United States, these people work for us. We don't work for them. He wants to be menacing. He wants to be intimidating to people. But I feel that I have a right to speak out, exercise my First Amendment right here in the country, and I will continue to do that. If I'm persecuted for that, that'll be fine. I mean, I'll deal with that to the best of my capabilities. But he hasn't really done that to me because I know his personality. He knows that he went over the line going after my wife. And so he knows that, and I think he has, to the extent he's capable of having, some regrets, because during the last 4 years, 3 or 4 people, cutouts of his, have reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to have lunch? Hey, do you want to come down to Mar-a-Lago? Hey, do you want to do this? I'm good. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And so that's where we are. And if people say, oh, well, you're an opportunist, you went to work for him for opportunism, I'm going to answer that by saying yes. Yes, I did go to work for him for opportunism. I saw an opportunity in my mind to help the people I grew up with. That's what I was thinking. Upon hindsight and reflection, was it too egocentric of a decision? Was it too prideful of a decision? It was. I have to own that.
And
But
that's
that's
where
what I was thinking. But it was an opportunity. So if you want to say I was an opportunity, if you're now saying that it's opportunism to go against him, I will disagree with that, because it's cost me business on my asset management company. It's cost me followers on my social media sites. When you pick a side in American politics, you lose half the people. Michael Jordan, they said, well, we want you to help this guy. Michael Jordan looked up and said, I Republicans buy sneakers too. Jordan is a much smarter business person than me. I have made a decision that I'm going to go into politics and speak my mind. If somebody thinks that's opportunism, then they don't know the lost opportunity that's also being expressed in that decision making.
And you're touching beautifully on this whole area of moral integrity, and when you have to stand up for something or even admit when you're wrong. I mean, I think
I think you have to do both. You have children, by the way, if you don't mind me asking?
I do. I have 4 married children and I have 4 grandchildren. So do you have children yourself?
That's wonderful. Congratulations. I have 5 children, none of which are married yet. But I really feel that you have to do that for your children. I really feel, there's certainly self-love and everybody has that, but I think you have to love your family more than yourself. And I think that you have to look at your family and say, hey, I got to try to live with integrity, because you know this from being a parent. They don't listen to you, but they watch your actions. And so I feel like I have to provide space for my children. They have been in a front row seat for all my failures, all my shortcomings. But in a weird way, sir, that helps them, because I have billionaire friends of mine and they have perfect memoirs. I read their memoirs and everything goes up and to the right. They never made a bad decision. I guess from the age of 2, they were making brilliant decisions and everything was perfect about them. And what they do when they do that is they're eclipsing their children. They're making it impossible for their children to find space for their own failures or space for their own levels of independence. So one of the reasons why I when I listened to your podcast, I wanted to come on is I think it's important for people to face the music. We have frailty in our lives. We have vulnerability. We have shortcomings. We like to imagine ourselves. We read about Nazi Germany. We like to imagine ourselves, oh, no, that wouldn't be me. I'd be hiding the Jews in my attic. I would be the activist. I would be doing the different things. And then we find ourselves in different situations. And frankly, we come up short. And we have to answer to that. Why do we come up short? And what's going on in our lives that leads us astray? And so in the case of Donald Trump, my ego, here was the self-narrative. The narrative was I went to public school, which is, I guess, a different designation for the United States than you guys. I think your viewers know the difference. It's a state school, and it was a middle-class area. And then I went to Tufts and Harvard Law School, then on to Goldman Sachs, built 2 successful businesses. Now I have the chance to work for the American president, and they're going to be in the White House, down the hall from the Oval Office. And that was a bit overwhelming for me. That was a bit too seductive and too tantalizing. My wife was like, don't do it. Frankly, she hates Trump like almost as much as Melania hates him, which is like severe Middle Eastern hatred of somebody. Or Eastern European hatred of somebody. I didn't listen to my wife because my ego was involved in the decision-making. And I wanted my self-narrative to be this myriad of different experiences. And I wanted, it was a sort of look at me, like an Icarus moment, if you will.
Correct.
And I got too close to the sun. and it burned me up. And when I fell into the sea, frankly, I had to learn how to swim.
Yeah. And it is interesting because many of the leaders listening actually know that even though they look like they've got a perfect career, when I get to coach them or work with them, you realize they've got feet of clay too, and they're full of mistakes. They just haven't admitted them yet. And so a lot of them try and put a mask on. I know I have in my career. I'm 63 now. But as an army officer, you had to look a certain way, behave a certain way. And I've done things where my integrity was questionable. I got divorced. You've been through divorce and you saved your second marriage, but it must have been at times because you give so much to the job that you're not looking after the partner you're with. And I know the failure of mine was probably a variety of things. One was a bad investment I made. The other one was just being so focused on doing my case was in the army, so focused on succeeding in your job that there is a price to pay, isn't it? Everything is possible if you're prepared to pay the price and live with the consequences, but both are very high. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I want to go to what you said about the military first, if you don't mind. I think that's one of the big problems in our country. We had, after the end of the war, the Second World War, I would say 85-90% of the members of Congress had served in the military. Moreover, our corporate leaders had served in the military. And so there was a little bit of a proper, the Latin word is fas. There was a little bit of a proper way to do things. And there was a little bit of a rectitude in the process, I remember even today, West Point cadets, when they're graduating, there's a little placard on their seats before they sit down. It says, "Remember your oath to the Constitution." And so there's a certain substance to this, which you're describing as an officer, and which I admire. But I think that the fact that our Congress is no longer tied to that military discipline, that military experience, and that shared experience, right? So a hard left guy like McGovern in the 1970s could be friendly with a hard right guy like Dole because they both served in the U.S. Army and they both were in battle in the Second World War. So they had this mutuality of respect for each other and the common goals of trying to serve America. So we don't have that anymore. But on the second aspect of what you're saying, there's no question. I think you have to face the music. I think if you don't face the music, you're only kidding yourself. Mm-hmm. And if you read any of the great Stoics like Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus, if you, any of those, I'm sure you guys pronounce it differently than me here in the United States. But if you read Aurelius, you would know that you have to face the music. You have to face death. You have to get comfortable with death. You have to accept the vagaries of life. I think if somebody said, there's no instruction manual, Jonathan, but if somebody said, okay, you're going to get born onto Earth, here is a packages of things. Okay, it's like the Greeks. When you walked into that open theater, there was a tragedy, a very sad face. There was a mask of sadness. And then there's comedy. There was a smiley face on the wall. And that was the Greeks letting you know, well, both of those things are going to happen in your life. You're going to experience death, the death of loved ones, maybe your own death. You're going to have to abandon. You're going to have to accept abandonment and loss as a part of change. And Aurelius said in Meditations, the 5-year-old version of you, Jonathan Bowman-Perks, and the 5-year-old version of me, Anthony Scaramucci, long gone. Not saying that you don't have core visual memories of it in your brain, but your representation of that long gone. And so you can mourn that or you can embrace that change. And I think we have to do that. And if we can do that, we become better leaders. We become more psychologically minded. We become more empathic. We become more thoughtful. But we also become less judgmental. I think that it's hard when you've had your own frailties and you've had your own bad shit happen to you or bad decision making, if you forgive me. It's harder to throw stones at other people. It's easier to help other people along. I believe that people change. Some people in life say, "Oh, there's no such thing as change, and leopard doesn't change its spots." But I don't believe that. I believe that people are neurally plastic. I believe people can evolve. I can look at you I can look dead into this camera and tell you that I am a different person today, post White House crisis, than I was pre White House crisis. I think I've been humbled. I think I'm more psychologically minded. I think I'm more aware of other people's frailty and perhaps more forgiving, or have given more space to understand that. My grandmother used to say something that I probably didn't understand uh, uh, until I was in my mid 50s. And my grandmother used to say, the best among us choose not to judge human frailty so harshly. And I didn't really understand that. I heard her say it. A couple of great aphorisms, good cliches to take with you in life. What other people think of you is none of your business. That one I got very early, so don't really care what other people think of me. But I didn't really understand that what she was saying was related to self frailty.
Yes.
You see, so in other words, the big message in my experience was, yeah, I made a mistake. My mistake was ego born. It was prideful. I can now make a decision. I can kick myself in the pants every morning when I wake up and say, oh, wow, I made these bad decisions in the White House, got myself fired. Or I could take the millstone of regret off of my neck. It's a very heavy millstone, I might add, and I can put it down and I can go forward without regret. I can say, okay, made that mistake. How do I improve next time? How do I prepare myself better? How do I speak with and act with more integrity and more honest self-reflection? Those are the things you can do. You can choose not to do those, but that's what I've chosen to do.
And I think that's beautifully put. And you did the analogy of back to the service with the military. And in the military, we talked about after action reviews. What have I learned? What are we going to do differently? And I think I've really enjoyed the conversation with you both now and before, where you talked about, you were honest enough to admit that you got things wrong, you made mistakes, and you're learning from them. You actually have adjusted to it. What worries me about whether it be authoritarians like the ones we're talking about, we'll talk about JD Vance in a minute, um, is they never see that they've done anything wrong. They don't ever admit. I mean, 10 words, three phrases, and these would be interesting with the politicians you've known, that really inspiring leaders who are vulnerable enough can say. First one is, I was wrong. Second one is, I don't know. And the third one is, I need some help. Have you ever known DJ Trump ever say any of those three?
I was wrong. No, I've heard him apologize one time. He doesn't apologize to people. He probably knows he was wrong in attacking my wife. He'll never admit to that. He'll never apologize. He was taught by Roy Cohn years ago to never admit that you're wrong, never back down, and so on and so forth. But he did apologize to Melania Trump after the Access Hollywood incident where he was on the bus. But by the way, I do think that he did that for political expediency information.
Yeah. And what worries me is that leaders that are listening in 125 countries around the world to you and I talking now, they go, well, General Stanley McChrystal wrote that great book on character, where he's been, it's very good. I think he's
Recent book. I read the book.
Yeah, me too, and really good. But they go, yeah, it's just like Anthony was saying at the beginning, character isn't destiny anymore. Trump's got no character, or his character is narcissistic, unethical, supporting criminals, and so he can get away with it. So perhaps I should be like that too. I mean, what's your advice to people who think this is the way to be? Be an authoritarian CEO. Just do that. Just command and control. Tell people what to do. They're all working for you. You don't work for them. How do you call out what the dangers are when they start to copy and imitate authoritarian leaders around the world, but particularly one you know well is Trump?
I really think about it. It's such a good question. I think that you're not going to like my answer, sir, but I'll just share it with you. I think there's a certain level of shamelessness that goes on with authoritarianism. So even if you're calling it out, they laugh at you and they march forward. It would require something that unfortunately humans don't have for some reason. So Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, a member of his own party, it would require him to rebuke Donald Trump. It would require him to have the guts to say, hey, you're breaching our Constitution, you're threatening our system, you're threatening our rule of law, a result of which I am now caucusing with a group of your fellow party members, and we're going to evict you from the White House if you don't stop your behavior. And so what we find happens throughout history is that the impulse, the need for power, like Lord Acton said, power is corrupting. So the need for power, somebody like Mike Johnson is like, I'm not going to give up my view in this office. I'm not going to give up the fact that my phone calls get returned instantaneously, or I'm in a parade of Secret Service in a Caravan that can get me faster to lunch than Jonathan or Anthony have to drive behind all the traffic. So I'm gonna do, even though it's not morally safe, not morally of high integrity, I'm going to do the bidding of this authoritarian. So the people that are willing to call the person out are generally not in the power positions they're generally not in the power positions to stop the person. Because if they were in those power positions, they probably wouldn't be as moral. They would have had to have made these politically expedient choices to get in those positions. So yeah, you can call somebody out. I can call somebody out. But that shameless authoritarian is laughing. They're like, yeah, well, they're not going to do anything about it.
But you're giving a good example here of what do whistleblowers do, both in politics and working for a CEO. Let's say there's a CEO who behaves exactly like DJ Trump behaves, and they know it's wrong, and they know it's criminal, it's unethical, whatever it might be. It's certainly not in the interest of the organization they're supposed to be leading. But they're, as you've used very finely, this term, a grifter, someone who's enriching himself and his family at the expense of everybody else, using it for their own. And many CEOs do this. They enrich themselves with the organization. Let's rephrase that. Luckily, a small percentage do, but when they do and people are working for them, what should they do? Because will anybody listen to them? Will they just get persecuted, just like you've done? You stood up against the juggernaut, and you're getting a really tough time. But we do still need whistleblowers when people are unethical, criminal, and the like.
Again, I don't want to be cynical here. I'm just trying to be realistic and observational. Very rarely do whistleblowers do well. Very rarely. They can blow the whistle and then they get accused of being a rat. And then you had this situation with the WikiLeaks guy. He ended up living in the embassy of Ecuador for, almost a decade. He's blowing the whistle, but he's also violating national security secrets. And then you have the kid that is now living in Russia for blowing the whistle on, obviously these were constitutional violations. Now, as an American patriot, I would say, hey, I really wish you didn't do it the way you did it. We're trying to keep the people safe. We're trying to prevent terrorism. There's sometimes a blurry line between these two things. Ed Snowden, I think, went overboard with his whistleblowing. So I don't know axiomatically how many whistleblowers I can look at and say, wow, they really made out well post whistleblowing. I don't think that necessarily happens. But if you disagree, please push back. But I would say something different. I would say that we got to start with people very early. I can't speak for the UK, but I can speak for the US. Our civic virtues and the values are not being taught in the school anymore. We have a moral relativism that has crept into the school. And George Washington was a slave owner. So therefore, we don't talk about George Washington with the level of reverence that we once talked about him. So that would also include Thomas Jefferson. So we have this sort of good and bad elements to people. And so now we're morally relative in the country, and we've dropped our civic virtues. So we're not anchored like we once were. I believe if we restarted that process of anchoring and built that foundation early, I think it would really help us. I also think in the United States, frankly, we need some form of national service which would bind us together again, so that people from the Dakotas would meet New Yorkers, and rather than have this tribal animosity or this tribal xenophobia, we could have some level of recognition that we're together. I'm 61 years old. I'm a couple years younger than you, but not by much. But in my 61-year observation, and I've traveled to probably 75 countries, including Iraq and Afghanistan during those wars, I would say that we have more in common with each other than we do not. I think the more time we spend with each other, the more we realize we have a common set of things that we'd like to get done. And so those are the things that are going to help us more than whistleblowing, in my opinion. But again, that's just me. That's just based on my observation.
Yeah, no, and I think realistic, and I think if we look at leaders who are out there today and they're going, well, how do I do the right thing when so many people are doing the wrong thing? Um, as you say, America's got very split now. Do you ever see us solving this thing? I mean, Trump's got Vance lined up next, who's a mini me,
Yeah,
who's changed his tune. I've read his book; he's changed his tune. What do you make of
we'll make a
Vance?
big bet. Vance is not going to be president. Vance. First of all, have you ever seen these memes of Vance? I mean, what he looks like a Cabbage Patch doll. These humongously fat memes that are going around of Vance. Vance is not going to be president. I mean, and Trump will destroy Vance. Ask Mike Pence how his presidency is going. Trump will destroy this kid before he gets to the presidency. So right now he hasn't destroyed him, but he's put him halfway through the wood chipper. And so I don't see Vance as the president. I could be wrong about that. I see Trump's movement as a personality cult. And so when Trump is off the stage, there's nobody's going to be able to hold that coalition together like Trump. When the journalist said, when he was bombing Iran, and the journalist said to him, well, you're not for forever wars, but you're bombing Iran. What are the policies of MAGA? And what was Trump's response, sir? The policies of MAGA are whatever I want them to be.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so no, there's no other politician in his camp that's going to be able to pull that off. We're going to disclose the Epstein list. There's a group of elites in the country and leaders that are pedophiles. And as soon as I get to the presidency, we're going to disclose the Epstein list. The poor woman who's his Department of Justice Attorney General, she's, I got the list on my desk. I'm going to expose it to you guys. And well, it turns out he's on the list, as Mr. Elon Musk pointed out. And so now they drop on a Saturday or Sunday after the Independence Day holiday that there's no list. Well, what do you mean there's no list? You're holding out loose leaf binders, phase 1 of the Epstein investigation. Now you're telling us there's no list. So, listen, again, he can get away with it. He will get away with it. That's my prediction. You think JD Vance is going to be able to get away with that? I don't think JD Vance, he has a level of shamelessness to his personality, but I don't think he's going to get away with it.
And do you think Trump will last all the way to the end of his presidency, or will anybody be able to find anything? I mean, you and I talked about the Constitution. If it's going to stick to the Constitution, he doesn't unravel it like you and I found with Lawrence Rees and the 12 Lessons from the Nazi Mind. He obviously would love to be president for life, a bit like many of the other authoritarians like Putin, who sees him as a bit of a role model. But do you see anybody unhinging him or bringing back an in leadership with integrity that is so missing in America?
Well, I don't think he's 79 and he's got some swelling in his legs and they've diagnosed him. They say that that's a benign situation. And again, I don't wish the president poorly from a health perspective. He won that election. I think he won that election fair and square. And so he has the right to the American presidency for the next 4 years or the now 3.5 years. I am very happy that he was not, and I repeat, I'm very happy that he was not assassinated last July. That would have been a nightmare for the country. And I think we have to abhor political violence. I think we have to abhor that sort of nonsense, if you will. I think it's terrible for a country. And so he won the presidency. So I expect him to be there until the term is over. If you tell me he has a health-related issue, 79-year-olds about to turn 80 sometimes get health-related issues. That could be something, but I don't think there's going to be anything. I don't think there's a smoking gun. He's been on the political stage, Jonathan, for a decade. If the Bidens had something on him related to Jeff Epstein, I think they would have played that card. If there was a smoking gun out there, there's people rummaging through his life. They would have played it. They've dropped lots of bombs on him: sexual allegations, sexual assault allegations, criminal felonies. None of that has stopped him thus far. I mean, I think one of your politicians said it better than me. I mean, you can't survive a dead woman or a young boy or something like that. Or maybe it was a Louisiana politician that said it. So far, we haven't been able to find any of that in Trump's background. So to me, I think he makes it to the end of his term. Uh, you know, could he have a health reason? I'm certainly not wishing that on him. I want to beat these people in the marketplace of ideas, the free marketplace of ideas. I want to debate these people like Steve Bannon. I want to debate Donald Trump. I want to debate them about the right or wrongs of policy. What's good for America, what's bad for America, and what's malevolent. I think, yeah, to be fair to him, he's had great success on our border. Even the former Secretary of State, John Kerry, has said publicly recently that we needed to have more border enforcement. You can't have people running across the border. It's unfair to your fellow citizens. Even Milton Friedman would have said that. You have a welfare state. The UK has a welfare state. You have a safety net. So therefore, people that are not in the UK, non-citizens, and want to come running across the border to participate in that. That's not fair to the taxpayers. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have orderly and legal immigration. Our country needs that. I believe that leads to population growth and great assimilation. I don't want to speak for your country. I'll just speak for mine. But you can't have 7.5 million people running at the border illegally. It was a travesty to those people and to the Biden administration. Trump did a very good job with that. He's done a very good job with that. But the malevolence and the meanness of creating a brown-shirted like ICE and pumping $100 billion into them, and they're walking around in our urban cities masked and pulling kids out of schools or pulling tax-paying people out of their jobs. I think it's insane. I think it's a very bad look for the country. It's a big turnoff, and I don't like it.
And it links to, you had a guest on your very successful Rest is Politics USA podcast, or one of your other ones, where you had the author that I enjoy, Lawrence Rees, The Nazi Mind.
Yes.
You're fascinated by history as I am. What do you see the parallels between what Trump and his supporters on the authoritarian side are trying to do, and it's being mirrored everywhere else, and what Hitler did? And throw into that mix, why is he such a supporter of Russia when we've always had America versus Russia? Now we've got Trump and Putin versus Europe. So there's two there perhaps, but firstly, the sort of Lawrence Rees and the Nazi Mind and the similarities.
Well, remember, one of the chapters in the Nazi Mind is to celebrate your enemies. It's a betwixt thing, but if you're an authoritarian or want to be an authoritarian, you want to seek out the other authoritarians. People don't remember this because Hitler was more famous, or I should say infamous, than Mussolini, but Mussolini was older than Hitler. And believe it or not, Hitler looked up to Mussolini. Mussolini's movement, the fascism, which was a bundle of sticks, really came out of Italy. And so even though Hitler was more powerful and he had a more powerful economy and a more mechanized system of warfare than the Italians, he looked up to Mussolini. And so these guys like that. But I think there's an extension of that. I firmly believe that Putin has something on. Yeah. It's a combination of different things. Some of it could be sexual, frankly. Some of it could be monetary. Some of it could be flat out treason against the United States. All of those things are possible, and because you don't act like that, you're a rich. Let's just tell the audience the truth. You're a rich guy, a multi-billionaire. You're leading the free world and the most powerful military and arguably one of the more powerful, if not the most powerful economy in the history of the world. You've got a elderly guy running a shrinking demography, running a country that has lost 14% of its GDP in the last 3 years. The country's GDP is now below the nation of Italy. You have an antiquated military in that country. Sure, they have a nuclear arsenal, but they have a defuncted, failing state, so much so that they can't beat, they're stalemated now with another nation that's 1/3 their size. So why would you be kowtowing to that person if you're the leader of the free world? The answer is they must have something very sinister on him. And I'll leave your viewers with this thought, your listeners with this thought. On the eve of the election, when it looked like that President Trump was going to win November the 5th, on state television in the Russian, in Moscow state television, they were showing naked pictures of Melania Trump. And so that's a big middle finger to Donald Trump. That's like, we got you. You're going to be doing our bidding here around the world. And so there's no other reason for it. You can't tell me, oh, well, he likes authoritarians, so he's doing that. No, there's something there that he's very, very worried about the exposure of. Putin knows that, which is why he scoffs at all of the idle threats. Putin's not behaving. I'm upset with Putin. This or that. He's not doing anything.
No. Before we go into we're near the end, but before we go into your top leadership tip, because you've got lots of practical leadership tips, I'm interested in one. You have some great contacts. I would be honored to have any of your key guests as my guests, but you particularly get on well with Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, and the banter between you all is fabulous to see. Tell us about what you've admired about working with those two, because they are, they've been through their own highs and lows and successes and failures. They've been very open about it, like you have, of your own. But what is it, if we're talking about inspiring leaders, I find the two of them quite inspiring, like I do find you. What are the qualities you admire about Alistair and Rory?
Well, both of them are phenomenal writers. So I would recommend their books, whether it's Alistair's book on depression, the Downing Street Diaries, I think they're called. Rory has written a couple of books, the most recent one about politics, which was a London Times bestseller.
I read it. Yeah.
I think he's just a brilliant writer. I also think he's had a myriad of different life experiences that anybody from a leadership perspective can learn from. And I think they're morally anchored. Whatever their mistakes were made in the Iraqi war, or whatever mistakes Rory may have made in his political career, I'm sure there are many, because guess what? You are on the playing field, you're going to make mistakes. If you're on the football pitch in Europe, you're going to kick the ball to the wrong person. If you're on the American football field in the US, you're going to throw an interception. It's just the nature of the game. So, but I find them to be morally anchored. I find them to be wise. But the thing I love about the two of them, perhaps more than anything, is their sense of wit and their sense of humor. One thing about you guys, which I generally admire, this is a cultural thing about the UK. I think that the Brits appreciate humor, and they also appreciate self-deprecation. I think the Brits realize that they want to take the you-know-what out of you, the PISS out of you, but they also like it when you take it out of yourself. And so when that happens in your country, people are like, okay, that's a regular guy. That's a guy I can get along with. He doesn't take himself too seriously. I was on stage last week with Caddy K at the Indigo Theater, and I said to people, for those of you that want me to stand up, I just want you to know I am standing. People that heads up. So people laugh, and they're like, all right, the guy doesn't take himself that seriously. And I think Rory and Alistair, despite their brilliance and despite their gravitas and the things that they've done in their careers and their lives, I think they have that about them. And so I have an appreciation for that in them. And I hope that they have, while I haven't been as successful as them politically, but I hope they have that appreciation for me in terms of my ability to be able to laugh at myself too.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Well, now we're down to the final wire. Anthony, would you be kind enough to introduce yourself, talk about some of the work you're doing now, such as your podcasts and also your crypto and blockchain business, and then just leave us with a top tip, but also mention Donald. You can't resist it.
Well, here's what I would say. I've had a very improbable life. I'm very blessed. Thank you. The good Lord gave me some level of intelligence and a pretty sharp memory. I was able to get through school. I grew up in a family that was uneducated. There were no books in my house. And so I had to do a lot of autodidactic learning, which is why I'm always surrounded by books, which is one of my love affairs is with books. I went to a couple of good schools. I built a successful business. I had a very humbling experience getting fired from the White House. But when I came out of the White House, I realized when I returned to my business, I had to adapt my business. And so I flipped the business into digital assets 5 years ago. Before that was a popular thing to do. And frankly, the president's policies, the Republican policies on digital assets have frankly helped my business. And I would say to you that in the course of the conversation, I mean the broad conversation, the one I'm having with you or other podcasters or in general, it was offered to me to do some podcasting. And so one of the things I wanted to do is because I love books, is I wanted to interview authors. On Open Book, I interviewed Professor Lawrence Rees. He was an example of that, but other best-selling authors, including fiction writers like Bonnie Garmis from Lessons in Chemistry, or Daniel Silva for his spy novels, Ken Follett, I think very famous British author who I adore. So it's a whole gamut of historians and fiction writers. I used to tell people, this is before inflation, Jonathan, for $10 and 10 hours, you can get 10 years of experience from an author. It's now $30 or perhaps 30 pounds, when you go to Waterstones. But what I would say to you, that's been a real love of my life. And so I enjoy that podcast. About a year ago, on the back of an interview with Rory and Alistair and me on their show Leading, Gary Lineker and his partner Tony Pastor reached out to me and said, would you be interested in doing a show related to kind of a spin-off show related to U.S. politics? Contemporaneous to that, Katty Kay had reached out to me. I had interviewed her for her book, The Confidence Code, on Open Book. I think she was impressed that I read her book, frankly, because that's one of the things I try to do before I bring people on. And so we teamed up. We did a pilot for them, and as they say, the other podcast, the rest is history. But there you go. It's a year plus later. We're getting several million downloads a month, and I'm very flattered by the response. Just a few points on crypto. I don't like talking about crypto on podcasts like this because I feel that you really have to understand it. I would say to your viewers and listeners, you have to do the homework on something like Bitcoin. Don't buy Bitcoin because it's going up. You have to buy Bitcoin to understand Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is a volatile asset. I bought Bitcoin at 16,000. It went to 69,000. It returned to 16,000. Didn't sell any Bitcoin. It's now at 117,000, but if I didn't understand Bitcoin, I would have probably sold it at the bottom 3 short years ago, and that would have been a bad idea for myself and my family. So I caution people, as a long-term investor, I invest a little bit of money every single month. I've been doing that since the age of 17. I find if you put a little bit of money in the markets every month, you'll buy less of the market when the market is high. You'll buy more of the market when the market's low. But if you have the patience, over 30 years, you could build a very nice nest egg. And so those are things I stand for. And then just lastly,
your top tip, Anthony.
on a leadership tip, and this is the one I'm probably bad at. And this is the one I have to focus on every day. And it's I got it down to one word, sir. Okay, you ready? Listen. That's my number one leadership tip. When I go to the office, rather than bloviating, and I'm sitting there with my people that are working. Remember, people don't work for me. People work with me. It's a very big distinction in my company. And so the people that are working with me, it's important for me to listen to them. And it's important for me to provide space for them to tell me what they think I'm not doing right, or what I could do better in the situation. And so I have found that that's made us very adaptable. I think that's one of the reasons why we've lasted 20 years on Wall Street, despite me getting blown out of the White House, despite the ups and downs of the global financial crisis, varying things that have happened in the crypto and other markets. And then this, I know you only asked for one tip, but I just remind people, if you live with integrity, you will always have opportunity. So you can have a wide latitude of being able to make a lot of mistakes if the people around you feel that you're living with integrity and you're doing things with the best of intentions. Those are my tips, sir. Those are my tips.
Great advice. Well, Anthony Scaramucci, thank you very much indeed for being on the Inspiring Leadership Podcast. It's been my pleasure. Please stay in touch, and if I can be of help to you.
No question. I enjoyed it a great deal. I wish you great success with your new book.
Thank you, Anthony. That's really kind of you.
All
Bye
the
for
best.
now.
Bye bye.
Bye.